Okay, so I'm here today with Dr. Perry. Thank you for being here, Julie. Many people probably actually know you not by what your day job is, but by what you do here in Grafton. So many people know you as the owner of Red Tractor Farm. A lot of people would probably be surprised to know that that's not actually your full-time job. Being a farmer, as well as all of the community events, and of course the Grafton Christmas Market is actually what one considers your side gig, and your full-time career is actually you are a microbiologist and have a PhD in that field. So thank you for being here today and making some time, as I know that time is absolutely short for you right now.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so wanted just to kind of take some time. So obviously there's a lot of information floating around there in the social media space and a lot of misinformation. And as we have you as a local resident and expert in the subject matter of everything coronavirus and COVID-19, just wanted to kind of check in and ask a couple of questions in terms of that people have been asking through when we posted that we were going to be interviewing you, and things that I've been seeing float around on social media with a lot of misinformation. And actually, one thing I just wanted to mention, because it was kind of interesting. So McMaster University was where you actually did your postdoctorate, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Correct. And I did see that actually someone you used to work for is one of the leading researchers that has been given a government grant, who's setting up a very large project right now as it relates to COVID-19 and finding some treatment. So that's really exciting. You must be really proud to have worked for and been very much a part of an organization that's now seeming to lead the way for Canadians on finding hopefully some sort of cure and down the road treatment for this.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I have. Go ahead. I was just going to say I have a lot of confidence in the teams at McMaster. The Institute for Infectious Disease Research is an absolute powerhouse, and they're doing great work.
Oh, good. Yeah, glad to hear it. So I don't know the lingo, obviously, like you do, so bear with me. But one of the things I want to start by asking is masks. So we're seeing a lot of posts about people making these masks at home. Some people are wearing them when you go to the grocery store, some aren't. What is your professional opinion on should we all be wearing masks when we go out? What is the benefit for this?
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand that masks are an in making homemade masks out of fabric, and that's absolutely fantastic. But masks do not replace the need for social distancing. The Chief Medical Officer of Canada, Dr. Tam, has endorsed masks now as an added layer of protection. But it's important to understand that a mask, certainly a homemade mask particularly, keeps virus in. It doesn't keep virus out. So what you're doing by wearing a mask is preventing you from coughing or spreading the virus on someone else. And that's a great way of reducing transmission in the community, because we know that up to 50% of cases of COVID-19 are actually asymptomatic, so they can actually cause some of the community transmission that we've seen. So masks are a great way of cutting down on that spread, but they don't replace the need for strong social distancing measures.
Okay, so really only to be used, we should all be using them, but only using them when we absolutely have to go out. And right. Again, not to throw a mask on and say, okay, well, I can go and visit my friends now because I'm wearing a mask.
That's right, exactly, yeah.
Okay. Now, there are some people that are coming up with some interesting homemade versions, so I wanted to get your professional opinion on this. I didn't tell you about this before, so you're going to love me for it. So I've got a couple examples here. Can you see this okay? Some interesting homemade versions, and I wanted to get from you, of the 4 examples, what would you say is probably the most effective, or are any of them effective? So you can see here, this gentleman has what appears to be a bottle cut out with his head in it. That's one of my favorites. This probably my personal favorite. So he's got a newspaper cone. What you might not be able to see is that he's actually using garlic. Is garlic in any way, shape, or form effective on preventing you from contracting coronavirus?
I will ask the researchers at MAC to test that out. I'm not sure the data.
Okay, and just a couple more here. Another great one. So in terms of, again, got to give them for being inventive. So she has a so she's got like a little sponge on her face there. And then lastly, one of my personal favorites. So this is a, it's a plastic bed in a bag. So in your professional opinion, are any of these effective in terms of alternatives to face masks?
It certainly would be hard to cough on someone else with your head in a bed in a bag. So I would pick number 6.
Number 6, bed in a bag is the winner. Okay, thanks for that. Sorry, just had
That's
to
the
throw a
winner,
little fun in there.
absolutely.
Okay. So on the topic of shopping, so obviously there are times where we have to go out and get groceries. So from your perspective, one of the things I've often wondered about, okay, so I've got my mask on, I have to go to the grocery store. What are some other things that I should be doing to make sure when I have to go out that I'm staying safe?
Yeah, so this is where proper hand washing comes in as one of the absolute key ingredients here. So when you're touching things at the grocery store, it's important to remember that anything that you have touched potentially has coronavirus on it. And so the idea is that you keep your hands, to yourself. You don't put them on your face. You don't touch your purse. You don't touch your debit card until you've disinfected your hands. So I've seen a lot of people wearing gloves around grocery stores lately, and that's actually not the best strategy, because gloves that touch your debit card after you've touched the shopping cart handle can equally transfer virus to your debit card. So the use of gloves is okay if you're taking off those gloves before you touch any of your personal belongings. Your gloves are as contaminated as your hands are. And if you don't take them off, then you're potentially doing more harm than good, because you're sort of thinking that you're protected when you're not. So when I go to the grocery store, particularly, I've been to Foodland in Coburg recently, and they have a great hand washing station set up right outside or right beside the cash. So as the cashier is ringing in my groceries, I just go to the side, wash my hands, and then I'm able to take my debit card out of my purse. So hand washing as frequently as possible, and sort of thinking of your hands as potentially contaminated while you're at the grocery store is the way to do it.
And that's a good point, because that's something I've seen as well. So for example, I take a box of cereal home to my house. So that box of cereal, should I be cleaning that? Should I be taking the cereal out of the box itself? Like, how long would the virus stay living on a surface like that for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's been a few studies done in lab-controlled environments. So the plastic. So if you're being extra cautious, the sort of cautious way of doing things is to leave your cereal boxes at room temperature in quarantine for a couple days before you go ahead and open them up. Obviously, perishable items need to go in the fridge, but you might want to give them a wipe down before you put them in the fridge. So that's another thing that a lot of people are having questions about too, is whether or not the virus can live at cold or hot temperatures. So the virus actually lives quite well at 4 degrees and in the freezer. So you're not actually killing anything by putting it in the freezer. So anything that goes in my fridge or in my freezer gets a little bit of a wipe down or gets taken out of its outer shell packaging before it goes in.
Okay, yeah, that's great information to know. Another question that's come up is takeout food. So a lot of people, obviously, we're trying to continue to keep supporting our local restaurants and services and food service business. So from your perspective, how safe is it still to be getting takeout food service, like getting a pizza delivered or picking up takeout from a local restaurant?
Yeah, so I think it's great to support local small business. I think that's important during this pandemic. The same kinds of precautions that you would take going to the grocery store should be taken when you get takeout food. So take off the outer packaging if possible. Put your takeout food right on your own plates and throw out your takeout food packaging, and then wash your hands after you've done that before you go ahead and eat. The real biggest danger for any of this is not packaging. It's actually the interaction with a person who might be infected. So you might want to ask your takeout driver to leave the package on the front step, if possible, having paid over the phone by Visa. those are the kinds of precautions that are sort of sensible and reasonable in this environment.
So there really isn't too much concern as it relates to necessarily the food preparation or the packaging. It's more so that interaction that you would have with a driver or staff person and picking it up.
Yeah, so coronavirus, we were just talking about its survival at cold temperatures, but it's actually killed by heating. So reasonable heating of food would kill the virus, but there's no evidence currently that it's transmitted through ingestion of food. So when you eat food and it goes down into your stomach acid is a great antimicrobial and kills anything that might be in that food. Obviously, you want to be shopping at grocery stores and taking or ordering takeout from restaurants that you would trust under normal conditions too, to be practicing good food safety guidelines and not coughing and sneezing, on your food. But under those kinds of circumstances, throw out your packaging, try not to interact with your delivery driver, and it's really not a different risk than you're taking by going to the grocery store.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question. So I guess this is the question everyone's asking and our Prime Minister is not answering it, and we can understand why, but the $1 million question, how long are you anticipating this quarantine situation is going to last? Are you able to provide an opinion on your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that our leadership is actually doing a great job right now during the pandemic, but also doing a great job at sort of deferring that question a little bit. I think we're in very good shape. I think the social distancing measures that were implemented 3 weeks ago were done so in good time, but it's going to take another several weeks for us to really appreciate the differences that those measures are taking. And it really depends a lot on what people's behaviors are in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I think if people continue to stay home, continue to practice all of these good, cautious shopping habits, et cetera, we'll be through the worst of it in 2 to 4 weeks. But it's going to be a few weeks after that before we're sort of feeling confident enough to predict that the pandemic is coming to an end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, understandably. So another question, this was actually one we had submitted. Could you walk us through a little bit about how the testing is actually done? A lot of misinformation out there from the media in terms of what are the ins and outs of actually how someone does in fact get tested for the virus.
Yeah, so the current gold standard method, certainly the only available method in Canada, is a swab that goes up your nose, unfortunately, not a comfortable swab to have done. It swabs the back of your nose and into your throat area. And so that swab is then sent to a lab, and we use molecular techniques to isolate the virus RNA. So coronavirus is an RNA virus. So that RNA is then probed using small DNA fragments that are highly specific to the virus. And so that test is about a 2 to 3 hour test in the lab. Unfortunately, because there's been so many people tested, there's been a bit of a backlog. And so people are getting results in sort of 5 to 10 days at this point. But that backlog is sort of being worked through. And so we're catching up a little bit on that side. Okay.
And do you have an opinion in terms of kind of this idea of a DIY, testing at home, and in terms of kind of, is that something that will be, something we can rely on, or no? It sounds pretty complicated going about the testing procedures.
Yeah, so actually what you're referring to is called a serology test. And it's been referred to almost like a home pregnancy test. And it's really what scientists are racing towards, because that molecular test that I was just talking about, although it's very specific, it only tells you if you're infected because you've gone to the hospital and you're quite sick and you've been sort of deemed to have the criteria of coronavirus that allows you to be tested. the serology tests that are currently under development, so the first one has just been approved by the FDA in the United States now, tests for the presence of antibodies to the virus. So it will tell you if you've been exposed to the virus and developed an immune response. So that's fantastic for all of these asymptomatic carriers that we were talking about earlier, because we're only testing a very, very small percentage of the population. Even if they're very sick, we're not catching, these vast asymptomatic carriers in the population. So the idea with the serology test is that you take a drop of blood, and this can eventually be done at home. Right now it's just done in a doctor's office. You take a drop of blood and you put it on a test strip, like a home pregnancy test is done, and it's either a positive or a negative. It's a 1-line or a 2-line type of test. And the idea is that if you come back with a positive serology result, it means you're immune to the virus and can potentially go back to work. So this is sort of a big deal, because that has economic implications. If you are now immune to coronavirus and you're a healthcare worker, you can confidently go back to work knowing that you're protected, and we can start opening up economies again once there's enough immunity in a population. So the development of the serology test is actually sort of a much anticipated development in all of this.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. And in terms of kind of obviously great news that we're slowly but surely getting there. And with that in mind, in terms of kind of, and again, some of these are very difficult questions to answer. How long do you think in terms of we realistically have a vaccine available for this?
Yeah, so there are over 30 vaccines currently in development. So that's great news. There are some antiviral therapies that are also in large clinical trials at the moment. Because vaccines all have to undergo, significant safety and efficacy testing, we're realistically still about 10 months, 18 months away from an effective vaccine. So the idea is that we're, also working on antiviral therapies concurrently to treat the symptoms of coronavirus and hopefully improve survival in patients who have it, to buy us time really until there's a safe and effective vaccine. Because really the only way that this pandemic will end is once there's sufficient immunity in the population, either through exposure or through vaccination.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know in terms of kind of, I think it certainly shows us why the importance of social distancing and staying at home is. This is by far a marathon, not a sprint, and it sounds like we've got a long way to go till we actually get something that, from what you're saying, at least another year before we even have a possibility of a vaccine. So
yeah, it sort of underscores the importance. No, I was just going to say serology testing will also give us a better indication of how extensive herd immunity is right now, because that's sort of a baby step towards controlling the spread as well.
Okay. So that wraps up the questions that I had. I very much appreciate your time today. Do you have anything else that you want to add that we didn't cover?
No, I'm so glad to have the opportunity. Thanks for asking me.
No, thank you. We really appreciate, in terms of, I know you're obviously extremely busy right now with running a farm, taking care of 2 little ones, and then you're, as I kind of joke a bit, your side gig as a doctor of microbiology. So I appreciate you taking a couple minutes to answer our questions and really kind of getting out there and sharing some actual factual information, because I do think that there's too much misinformation floating around in the social media space, and there's a lot of comfort in knowing the actual facts of it from an expert like you. All right. Thank you, Julie. You take care.
You too.